Today, we have Rick Bernhardt, who's a featured speaker who has spoken many times before on the issues associated with military-based recovery and reuse. He is uniquely qualified to provide this insight on the planning challenges that we face, mostly focusing on the work that he's done, not about how we do it, but how they've done it, and how we can determine later how their work might apply. Rick is a signatory to the Charter of New Urbanism and has over 40 years of experience in sustainable community design, has served on the board of the American Planning Association, and his work on the Orlando Naval Training Center, which I had the opportunity to visit near Baldwin Park in Florida, received the Catherine Brown Award from Congress of New Urbanism. Rick is currently hard at work at Nashville Next, the City of Nashville's 2040 General Plan, and was recently awarded the 2014 Leadership in Regional Thinking and Action Award from Cumberland Region Tomorrow. Now, when you look around, you might notice that Orlando and California have a few things in common. They're known for their wonderful beaches, great vacation spots, livable communities, surfing, and generally great weather. Right, Rick?
Not much surfing in Florida.
However, when it comes to community development, each location is unique. We very much look forward to Rick's comments on his successes and unique opportunities associated with sustainable principles implementation. Rick.
Thanks, Michael, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and share some of our experiences that we had in Orlando in terms of turning this base around. As Michael said, I'm not here to either critique or even suggest anything in particular with regard to how you deal with the Fort transition. What I'm here to do is to share the process and results that we had in Orlando, and hopefully something in that process may be applicable here. You may take away something from that process in terms of the way that you go about that. I just want that disclaimer because I'm certainly not qualified to recommend anything to you. You have outstanding consultants coming on board. I've worked with Victor and Joe for a number of years. In fact, we were the first, when I was as planning director in Orlando, we were the first city to hire them outside of the South Florida area. So I've known Victor and Joe since they first started their team, and you could not have a better team to work with, just saying that. But what I want to do is really share with you. We were basically in the same time period that Fort Ord. We were in 91, name closure. We were, and in 1993, basically this is it. I mean, the two bases are very different. I mean, we're an urban base. We're 1,200 acres or so. We are located roughly 2.5 miles from downtown Orlando, adjacent to Winter Park. And we're just a totally different situation. But I think the process, and I think some of the things that were done and accomplished in there is extremely important. When we first received notice that we were going to be closed, the very first thing that was done was that the mayor at that point in time immediately appointed a reuse commission to examine what was going to be the future of the base. We were notified that the base would close in 1998, so we had, 6 or 7 years of lead time in terms of noticing that. While at the time there were some communities that were fighting that process, we said, no, we're going to just move on and we're going to try to figure it out. The focus of that, the charge that the mayor gave was that it was going to be founded on a foundation of community involvement. It was going to be community owned and defined as to what we want to have it, and we were going to seek assistance in terms of development. We weren't going to be the developer at the very beginning. The base itself is located, it has, again, is an urban location. Let's get this to change. Okay, whoops. All right, it's surrounded, it was an urban location, but it was completely isolated and walled off as any military base, I think, in this country. But it had existing development completely surrounding it. The key question that we first were faced in Orlando, a very fundamental question was, did we see this as a greenfield development site, an opportunity to create a community in isolation? There were calls for this to become open space. It's in a urban area. Should this all be open space? But should it be created in isolation, or should it be infill or redevelopment? Should we be reconnecting this to surrounding neighborhoods? And that became probably the most important decision that was made at the beginning, was the fact that it wanted to be reconnected to the surrounding development patterns. And we realized at that time, and I'll talk about it a little later, what some of the key issues were in that was going to create some problems. I'm sure that in California that y'all have no objection when new development comes on and wants to tie on to the existing street system. You've never heard any opposition to that at all. But if you can imagine that all four sides had extensive urbanization, and so we were going to reweave this into the community, you might kind of expect what was going to happen. We immediately proceeded with our base reuse plan, our initial base reuse plan that was done between 1993, 1994, and it consisted of over 175 public meetings to talk through what we wanted the base to be. Now, this it formed simply the start of our process. As you can kind of see up in the images, it was we knew we wanted a mixed-use facility. We began to define that, and we got that certified by the Navy and able to transfer this as a plan that was going to be implemented. And it focused on, these are the terms that we used, sustainable development at the time and traditional neighborhood design. This was before the days of new urbanism. This was traditional neighborhood design, but that was the element. And so what we were looking for, and I'm not sure there's a lot of surprises here, but we wanted to replace the economic impact. We wanted to seamlessly blend that back in. We wanted to retain open space. It wasn't going to be completely all parkland. We wanted superior urban design. And you can kind of see here, we wanted a rapid turnover and be able to reuse this base. And so those became the principles that the community agreed on, again, between 175 meetings that involved, while the base itself, there are actually 4 pieces of property, but in 3 jurisdictions, and that's another difference from what y'all have. But there was a consensus through that process that we were going to make some decisions as to what we wanted to do. Now, we took that base reuse plan and said, okay, that's a good place to start, but we need to have more definition as to what the base reuse plan actually is. And so we started kind of the second process and really what wound up being the second base reuse plan by starting with a visual preference survey. And we also did a transportation plan, and we did some other plans that I'll talk about in terms of market study and stuff like that. But again, this is based on that premise of community engagement and community involvement. What do we mean when we're talking about linking this with the adjacent neighborhoods? What are the unique parts of our community, the Orlando and Central Florida community, that are unique and that we want to protect and we want to achieve as we go through this process? And at least in our situation, streets are the most important public spaces, and they were the things that people identified with the most in this area. A lot of the streets in the area are brick streets, but nevertheless, they're very strong public realm with a lot of landscaping, and as you have here and stuff like that, you obviously take advantage of a 12-month growing season. But streets were important, and we surveyed the community on a whole series of things, from what do they think about what type of open space in the pedestrian realm and signage and multifamily. How did those elements go together? What were the unique parts of Orlando that were in those elements that we wanted to be able to define as we go forward? And so we kind of came up with what wound up being a set of draft urban design guidelines. This becomes, in effect, the transition between the base reuse plan and really the second. I don't know that it was ever called a second base reuse plan. But what we realized was that the base reuse plan, while it called for a mixed-use development pattern, we knew what most developers in Florida thought was mixed use. And that wasn't what we were talking about. We weren't talking about a potted PUD type development where you had multifamily. You had all the uses, but they weren't integrated and they weren't walkable and all that. And we knew if we simply left it with the base reuse plan the way it was, what we would get would be a number of Florida developers and developers from all other places in the country that would simply continue to pod that off the way that it had been in the past. So part of the work that we did at that time, and again, all this is before it's actually been transferred, was in developing urban design guidelines and beginning to define those. These are an extensive set of urban design guidelines that actually a developer could have taken these design guidelines and gone forth and build the plan. But what we were using them for was to take that the input that now by that time had been about 250 public meetings and actually define what we're talking about when we're talking about mixed use, what our vision was, what was important to the citizens of Orlando and Central Florida, and how does that actually translate to reusing the base itself. Okay. All right, so we went through that process in terms of the development of design guidelines, and we put together really the second plan, which was the vision plan. We went through a series of things, working with the community, developing a vision plan that defined the vision of the citizens of Orlando, the citizens of Central Florida, into what they wanted their base to be. How did it begin to connect? It expressed what were the specific values. And as you see, it was pretty specific. I mean, this is a 1,200-acre base. Roughly 400 acres were undevelopable, so you had 800 developable acres here. And so what we wanted to do before we went out to try to solicit a developer was make it clear what the expectations were of the community as they went forward. And so it was critically important to have established a vision. Now, I think that there is something actually very beneficial that has resulted in being beneficial at this time. Now, this was done in the mid to late 1990s. There were relatively few new urbanist communities. We were lucky enough to have Celebration in that area, but relatively few. We'd done some projects in Orlando. But what we actually were able to take advantage of and what sustained this, I think, through a longer period of time, and actually has sustained it and positioned it today to be extremely successful, was that instead of going with the potted type of development that was characteristic of the housing demand and the demographic traditions and the demographic characteristics of the 1990s, we actually were putting in place a plan that is very much in demand for the demographics of today. A plan that is based on the changing demographics. And now this is a Nashville figure because we're doing this Nashville plan, but one thing we learned was that in the period roughly from 1985 to 2010, 75% of all the households in our area, and this is generally right for the rest of the country, I'm not sure it's accurate particularly for here, 75% of all households were what's called prime home buyer households, or households where the head of household was 35 to 65. And so the demand for housing was a very different kind of housing. You were looking for move-up housing and all that. Over the next 25 years, that number is going to go down to 35%. And what you're seeing with the aging boomers and the millennials changing household size is a much stronger demand for walkable, mixed-use urbanism. And so we were able, not necessarily knowing that, but we were actually able to build that into this process. It helped sustain that through its development and continues to make it successful today. But it was a plan that actually focused on mixed-use walkable communities. And it had a series of core elements that we wanted to use, and I talk about these over and over. About the precedents and best practices were those who were in Orlando, an understanding of sustainable development and traditional neighborhood design. This slide and several of them were from that time because new urbanism wasn't talked about at that point in time. We wanted to be able to recognize market demands and changes, and so there's some criteria in there, and we wanted to be objective in terms of how that goes. And And so developing the framework and developing the plan and developing the vision was the community statement of what the expectations were. And so if you were interested in doing that, then we were very interested in working with you and coming in to help and assist in the community. Let's see. So the message that kind of came out of that process was that together, and this was the community and the developer and the government, were going to work together to create a long-term sustainable community. So let me talk a little bit about what was the role. Why did we have a master developer? We realized that, and we had done development. I mean, we had a redevelopment agency that had done that. But we felt like that the expertise and the potential was much greater to actually have someone that had focused and had experience in doing that. So part of the plan I talked about in terms of draft design guidelines included an engineering and infrastructure analysis, and it also included a business plan that talked about what the market was, what was sustainable in the area, and all those were things that the city again was doing, or the Reuse Commission was doing at the time before we ever went out to hire a developer. Our intent at the time, and I think rightfully so, was we wanted a developer that would basically develop and reuse the base. We didn't want a developer that had to spend a lot of time going through process. And so the city was willing to spend the time that was necessary to go through process and to talk about the issues and to come up with a plan that we would expect developer not necessarily to implement. It was very important that we made that clear. We didn't expect them to build our plan. What we expected them to do was to take our plan as a base and improve upon it the way that they could improve upon it as a private sector developer. So what we were working through there was we had the vision plan, we had the market analysis, we had an appraisal. That was an interesting part in and of itself, and I'm sure y'all had interesting parts about appraisals with the Defense Department. We had the business plan. We were going to work out an MOU, and in our case, what we were looking for was a simultaneous transfer of the land from the Department of Defense to the city to the developer. So this was a simultaneous, I think the city, and that was our focus, and that was where we were headed. Now, when we went out, we had that information. We had a clear vision, and we went out and requested firms that were interested in actually implementing that vision. We got 7 qualified packages. We narrowed that list to 4 teams. And one of the more interesting things that was done as part of the negotiation was that myself, the finance director, and our redevelopment agency director all were given the ability to work individually or independently with each of the proposers to help strengthen their proposals. So we could work with them. We weren't obviously sharing information, but we were trying to work with them on things that we knew the community was focused on that they might be lacking or short of. And actually, one of the teams, much to their chagrin, didn't take our advice and wound up getting kicked out as soon as they went into the public process just because of the issue. Then I'll talk about that in a minute. So we wound up with 4 serious proposals. If you're in a planning field at that point in time, we were comparing 4 proposals that on a scale of 1 to 100 ranged somewhere between 97 and 100. You know, it's one of those that you could not, because there was a clear vision. You had outstanding designers. I mean, we had the designers, mainly one of the designers was Peter Calthorpe from this area. We had the same design team from Celebration, which was the kind of the preseason favorite because there was a lot of locals on that. We had DPZ out of Miami, who was one of the designers, and then we had SOM, Phil Enquist of Skidmore Owings, which everybody said, what? They do new urbanism. Anyway, that was another, but actually was an outstanding presentation. But we spent roughly, I think it was about 4 months or so in 1998 soliciting a developer, going through in terms of presentations. We did site tours of development that they had done, what their expectations were. They were providing a price, what they were going to bid for the land. And then we went through a presentation process and a developer agreement process. It was clear from the beginning that we were not necessarily interested in selecting the base, and this was part of the criteria, the highest price. That was not going to be the factor. It was going to be a combination of price and quality of presentation as we went forward with that. So just to quickly show you those, one of these, this was the DPZ proposal, but again, you can see they're similar to what the plan was, but this one they're different. They are different in terms of enhancements that each of the design teams did. They presented their proposals. All of them are roughly the same kind of quantity of 3,000 to 3,500 dwelling units, 1 million to 2 million square feet of office, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 500,000 square feet of commercial, all roughly on 800 acres of developable land, 200 acres of lakes, 200 acres of parks. So that was one proposal. This was the Calthorpe proposal that was, again, with WCI is the money backing. They took a little different approach, relocated the town center in a different direction and orientation. Again, images and there's obviously a lot more information, but quick images. This is the celebration proposal. At the very last minute, they wanted to. The problem that they had was they actually wanted to run a 4-lane road through here, and that was not something that would actually have presented significant traffic issues after we had worked with the community on the traffic issues, and they wound up being obstinate kind of to the end, and they got cut out when they went through the process. And so what I'm going to spend probably the rest of the time on is talking about the team that won and why they won and what the results have been on the ground and how we've gone through the regulatory process. It was Orlando Partners, and Phil Inquist was the designer, SOM, Pritzker money, other things were involved with it. But it's interesting from the very beginning. You begin to see their proposal, and if I can quickly go back, just take a look at that. And this is simply a presentation technique that, that's not going to show. Yeah, if you look at that presentation technique where you see the base, and then you see what's around it, or kind of hidden away, and you look at Orlando Partners, it's almost impossible to see where the boundaries of the base are. This is very subtle, but it's a true understanding of what the city wanted in terms of a seamless integration of this base into the community. And so I talked to Phil a lot about the way they did their presentations, and he says, well, it's really the quality of the work. I said, yeah, but it's an understanding of the way you do that, where you understand that this is part of the community. Their focus from the beginning, their key theme was knitting the community together. Again, Mesro Stein, it's Pritzker's money, and Gulf Atlantic. They had also done they'd done 2 base reuses, I think. Glenview and Fort Sheridan were 2 that they had done. So they had some experience in terms of base reuse, which actually came to play pretty well as they were negotiating when we were doing the transfer. I know that y'all haven't had any experience with this either, but we got sued. Actually, we didn't get sued. The Congress got sued because they did not have, in theory, they didn't have the authority to close bases. So that delayed the process 18 months, which obviously wasn't going to win anything, but it still delayed the process. But they were able to their experience of having that help lead them through and assist us in there. And these are just a list of different consultants and people they had. So let me talk just a little bit about what our agreement was, because the Navy basically said that our appraisal was that the land was less than worthless because of the cost of demolition and cleaning of the site. It was actually less than worthless. The Navy said it was worth 25 million. I think they said it was worth that. And so what we did was work out an agreement. We agreed to ultimately pay them $1.2 million for the option to buy the land. And then once we selected a developer, if it was more than that, then we would split the money 75% to the Navy, 25% to the city, over $10 million, and then 60-40 over that. I mean, it was a reasonable approach to do that. But it was a very open and public process once again as we went through there. The program, like I said, is roughly the same as many of the others, 3,000 residential units, 3,500 square feet of commercial, 100 million five of office, 2 new schools, 200 acres of parks, and other infrastructure improvements there. They went through, their estimate as they were starting this process was it was going to take them about 12 to 16 months to deal with the brownfield phases of this, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And they thought that this was roughly a 10-year build-out. This is in 98, 2008, roughly, or 99 to 2009. And actually it came really close to doing that. It probably, even, this is before we got sued, and you put the 18-month hold on it, but if you take that out, it's pretty well. Today it would be about 95% complete. There's a couple of parcels here and there, but they move forward. First thing they had to deal with, if you remember that first image, was buildings and demolition. So there was an awful lot of things that had to be taken care of. Y'all have had to deal with a lot of this. But this was a very intense building site. It had a lot of buildings. There were a lot of tall buildings. There were a lot that were simply not usable. They weren't up to today's codes. They were very substantial buildings, but you can't function a 10-story building with no elevator, with 1 restroom per floor. And so what they realized, and what our analysis realized, was it was likely that you were going to tear those down. But what they wound up doing in tearing all of that down was to actually recycle all of the materials on site. Everything was recycled on site. The vast majority, you can see that, 300,000 tons of concrete. I know y'all have got a little bit of that here, but if you look, here it is before, and then you wound up seeing this. We had 200. There's our piles of on-site debris. It was all taken and ground up on-site and used on-site. We used it for street underlayers. We used it for groundwater exfiltration tables and everything. But that was, at the time, it was claimed to be the largest reclamation and demolition reclamation site in the country, and I don't know anybody had any way to actually review it. That view is actually about 1.5 miles away from that, so it's actually pretty impressive. It's pretty impressive, especially when you're in Central Florida, where the elevation varies. Our base elevation was about 95 feet, and our highest elevation was 110. And so when you see this, you can see this from a long ways away. There actually were some people that thought that, well, gosh, we could leave that in the mountain. People would think we got mountains, if we paint them and you could do this kind of stuff, and we could be something really, really significant. So information from Orlando Partners, it cost them about a little over $1 million to apply. This was in the competition. It cost another $3.5 million in their closing, so they're $5 million roughly into it. As they close, before they start, there's a number of things in terms of closing that they have to work through. They're estimating a brownfield about $30 million, in infrastructure about 66. You're $100 million into the project before you turn a penny, other than having ground that you can begin to build on. And there were a series of different parts of the base itself. The initial lease area, there was come on. I'm not sure what's going to show up next, seeing as it's decided to go back. Okay, there were certain retained parcels. I know y'all have one. DFAST has a parcel on yours. We have DFAST. They're the agency that obviously knows where best to pick property. There had been a brand new operations building that was built on one of these lakes that hadn't even opened yet when they decided to close the base, and DFAST decided that was a wonderful place to be able to look out over the lake and in this brand new building. And so they're there. There were restricted parcels. There were some that needed to be cleaned, and some arsenic and stuff like that. So you kind of get a sense there were certain parts of this. So In terms of the context, again, going back to the plan from, let me go, sorry, I don't know why it's slow. Anyway, I'm not going to hit that. Let me go to the next one. This one wound up being the one that we spent the most time on. This is the relinking of this to the community. And what we realized through much of the process the city was going through and the Redevelopment Commission was going through at this time was saying, okay, if we're going to seamlessly link this in, we need to actually do that. We didn't identify all these, but we identified the fact that there were 16 major connections that had to be part of this plan, part of any plan that a developer did. And we had to process as staff, there were 3 jurisdictions that were involved in this, governmental jurisdictions. And so our job was to hold together a house of cards until we could get this thing actually underway. And we held meeting after meeting after meeting. We ran traffic model after traffic model after traffic model, and we were able to convince everyone involved that as bad as they did not want their connection, as long as everybody else had to suffer, they would take it. But let me tell you, if one of them had gone away, all of them would have gone away. So it's kind of working that process, spending time with the community, and making the connection. They ultimately connected 28 different streets in here, and the traffic filters its way through the way it's intended to. The key elements that the Baldwin Park team had was sustainability, urban design, and public realm. And again, part of that understanding of how it fits in with the larger picture. These are images from their proposal. They saw this as part of a 100-year plan to create a great park system for the whole region. It wasn't just for the base. It didn't there. Their environmental strategy recognized how it tied in to the environmental components around the community. They're focused on an environmental framework plan that used the public realm, used the great park concept, that connected the lakes. One of the things about Orlando that's particularly unique is the fact that most of their lakes, the buildings don't back on the lakes. They're not private lakes, they're public lakes where you have buildings that front on a street that fronts on the lake, and so the park surrounds the lake. And they picked up that same concept here and maintained public access to all of the lakes in terms of parks surrounding those. This was, again, in their initial proposal. They focused, as you see here, these are images from Orlando in terms of the houses actually fronting on the lake or being, so the lakes are publicly accessible. People know they're there. And so their lakes in Baldwin Park, which is an image from, are all public and they're all accessible. Again, they have about 250 acres of lakes, all of which are publicly accessible as you live there. Transportation, again, they built on the fact that they wanted to have an accessible community. This was, the work that was done in terms of making sure the linkage was there. There was not a 4-lane road that cut through here and tied that up. And you can begin to see there were certain critical connections in terms of providing access to all the major roads. But again, this is a lot of development, you know. This is a considerable amount of development. Focused on bikeways. Again, this was back before bikeways were the thing to do, but they recognized that and linked into the bikeway system that's part of the Orange County and Central Florida system. Again, heavily used system and very key part of actually reintroducing this. They recognize the potential for transit in terms of including making provisions for potential light rail connection as the community develops in the future in terms of where are we, you know, where are we going. They're not in light rail. They also focused on walkable neighborhoods, mixed-use neighborhoods, diversity of housing types. All these were ideas that were clearly in the original, in the design guidelines that had been developed, but they were critical importance that a developer reaffirmed the importance of doing that, the importance of really building a livable community that's tied in and actually focuses on reintegrating that community. And they learned from, they picked up housing types and stuff from the Orlando area in terms of cottage courts, in terms of garage and accessory apartments. These are units, these are images from there. There's a diversity of single-family housing, significant diversity of multifamily. In this case, you've got multifamily right next to single-family. It's seamless because you've built a very strong street wall. So there's not really differentiation between the single-family and the multifamily areas. There are multifamily. This is a link to the town center in terms of through some of the multifamily. Again, other types of multifamily on there. And there's small single-family. Again, some smaller single-family units. So again, a diversity of housing types. In terms of commercial, small commercial, somewhat hidden commercial, at least in Florida, everybody shops at Publix. They always know where their Publix is, so that's going to be something that's going to come up. It's not important that Publix be very visible because you already know where they are there. A lot of businesses were built in terms of small business, and I'll hit that just in terms of actually, it wasn't ever envisioned as a business office park. One of the things that the vision came through was we wanted it to be more like a college campus that kind of flowed together as opposed to segregated in terms of different types of businesses and business locations. Okay, it'll wake up in a second. Or maybe it won't. Well, let's see here. Okay. Again, in terms of learning from neighborhoods on the business part, they basically focused on that. There was a key focus on having key civic sites, integrating civic sites from the very beginning, churches, schools, and having activities. It's a very, very popular place for activities, as you can well imagine, in terms of community fundraising activities that are critically important. They also learned in terms of the character of the schools. A lot of the schools are integrated neighborhood schools and are critically important. So they redesigned, I mean, the two, they've got a middle school, they had to build an elementary school, both of which are focused on that. So let me talk a little bit about the regulatory process, because that's kind of the key thing. It's extremely important, and it included three important elements. The development, it recognized this was going to be a phased project over time, so it recognized the need for specific or neighborhood plans and a process for doing that, special permitting and platting process, and something that was probably unique at that time, and I still think is relatively unique, was the need to establish from the very beginning a community association of residents and business owners that were going to be part of the process. As it transitioned from a development site to a community, then it was actually built in to this, a requirement that the developer actually present a process for a community association. So this was a regulatory plan that was adopted, had a whole set of design guidelines that went with that. It set forth the framework, again, building on their proposal. This was done right after the transfer. I mean, this was done while we were being sued, but right after the transfer, we went through an extensive process with the community of detailing out what the land uses were in terms of, and there's a lot of flexibility on these land uses. It's not, detached is open to an awful lot of different kinds. We built in provisions for anomaly locations that would allow really quirky things to actually happen, to where everything doesn't have to be exact. And built in some opportunities. But the key thing was that once this land use plan and regulatory plan went into effect, everything else became administrative. And so the whole process, and this was important, was to make it extremely difficult to get to this phase and thorough, but once we got to this phase, there wasn't going to be a second, third, and fourth, and fifth bite at the apple. It was going to be one process, and there was going to be a fairly straightforward process as long as you were implementing the plan. There were some other things in terms of, again, detailed plans, infrastructure plan, master landscape plan, and things that were part of this. But it was a planning process that engaged the community and actually one of the adjacent jurisdictions, let's see, how can I say this nicely? They decided they were going to boycott part of the process, and we warned them that once you did that, then there wasn't like a second bite at that apple, because once it got adopted, then they wanted to argue. They were not, there were 3 jurisdictions that were involved. This was a little further away, but they were part of the process. And then when they left, they said, "Oh, we didn't think you were serious. We really do want to fight this out." But there wasn't a format to do that because it was not designed that way. Infrastructure plan, pretty straightforward in terms of things that were there. There were different neighborhood planning areas that they had phased that allowed them to come in and actually detail that out and do the platting and the other things that would be consistent with that land use plan. What was the process for review was, again, administrative process. There was a town design review committee. It had those people that were on that. The planning director and public planning official, both city employees, public works directors, and CRA director were city employees. Part of the requirement was that there be a town planner. That planner had to be was hired by the city or by the redevelopment agency, but was paid for by the developer, fairly straightforward. And then there were 2 developer representatives on there to make sure they're there. They developed a town development manual, and this is, may or may not be important in terms of where you're at. But again, this community association was extremely important. It still exists today. It's very vibrant today. I think, does exactly what it was intended to. It provides all the normal opportunities for communication among neighbors in Baldwin Park, but it also ties people together in terms of what's going on. And they're both at the kind of the entire area neighborhood scale. They're at smaller scales, and they're at a business association, but it's built in terms of being part of the communication process as we go forward. The landscape plan included transferring a lot of existing trees that were on site and preserving those trees, either preserving them or transplanting them. They moved, I think, 250 trees that were on the base around to different parts of there that made more sense. And so I'm going to hit you with some of the changes. 1998, that's the base as it existed and was transferred. 2001, 3 years later, the base cleared. 2004, 3 years later, you can see the vast portion of the kind of the southeastern section done. 2005. Again, New Market Street, the entranceway, and you can kind of see down into the town center. And kind of hit some of the areas, the different components of their plan, which are all kind of integrated in. Their environmental framework, this was the drill field. We don't have an ocean in Orlando, but we do have a ship. And we never were sure about that. It's just plywood, and that was part of the demolition, but it was I don't know. They thought it was something. So there it is, the drill field as it existed. And this is kind of how it transformed itself into the part of the Great Park, and looking back towards the southern portion of that location. The Great Park actually became a joint park with the school, the middle school that's immediately adjacent to that, a new middle school that had to be built by the developers. It actually involved a land swap with an existing middle school that they relocated and able to. Again, that's it in 2005. That portion, again, built out and developed out with you can see the middle school kind of there in the middle. It was originally Blue Jacket Park, or it is now Blue Jacket Park. That Blue Jacket was the drill field in there. And that represents the Great Park. It's lined with a mixture of housing types on the Great Park. Single family on the park itself, multifamily, again, on the park itself, by making sure that the buildings are framed in a way that allow them to relate to each other and relate to the scale of the park, seemed to work itself. This is kind of looking at the town center in 2004. Again, this is all 6 years old, roughly. 2007, you can kind of see the grand entryway. That Entry feature, well, I'll talk about that in a minute. Again, 2008 is it's built out. The entry feature you see there, the water that you see there is down New Broad Street, and it's down the median of New Broad, and the most expensive homes in the entire development are along there. And what in reality that is a stormwater management pond. It's one that they've used that as a major amenity in here, not something as an afterthought, but something that really is used as an amenity as you work your way through here, and it's just a great location. There you kind of see the water and the homes in the background, and the bridge that is there. The village center itself, pretty well developed out. Again, an idea that it was critically important to provide a village center. There's the location from those original. These are all from the original kind of presentation that the developer made in terms of how he wanted to use that, kind of a strategy for what that is. And then again, looking at that today, or in 2007, that was mixed use, Main Street, kind of. These are apartments off of Main Street, again, a Main Street kind of character that begins to define Baldwin Park and the Baldwin Park community. Apartments over, or condos over, apartments over retail, kind of the town center area. Again, other buildings that are in the town center. And I mentioned Publix, and here's what I want to kind of say to the arrow itself points to the front of the Publix supermarket. If you don't notice anything, you should notice the fact it has absolutely no street frontage. It's on the back side of the village center, and it is surrounded. Here's the entrance to it. It's got fourplex buildings, live-work units. There's the entrance. You can kind of see the Publix in the background. If you go down one of the other side, there's liner buildings, live-work liner buildings. This is actually the liner building, but this is their service delivery. And again, it fits in, and it's very successful. It provides them the front parking, but all that's screened from the public realm, if you will. Village Center, their general area, the area around the town center, a little higher density development, mostly multifamily. Some live-work units are there. Townhouse units are there. A variety of housing types, housing prices are in this area. The rest, what we call the neighborhood general areas, small blocks, it's still a mixture of housing types and density. Again, looking at it 2004, and then looking at, again, that northwest section in 2005. Actually, I think that's 2007, actually. I'm sorry. I think I misput that. That's 2007. Wasn't that quick. But again, you had division and you were able to go through. You didn't have to have, we had the vision was set forth at the beginning, and you didn't have to go through and argue about every one of these little subdivisions as it went forward. There's a whole variety of different kinds of housing in here. Courtyard housing is one. Again, another type of courtyard housing. Again, single-family housing, walkables, a mixture. That's another example here of single-family and multifamily located. Again, this is around a little neighborhood park, single-family around that. Again, just examples of what's there. A closed single-family with a little closed type road system. Multifamily tends to be at the end of blocks and in its strategic locations, located with a park. A New Market. These are the houses. These are the bigger houses I mentioned right across from on New Market, across from the stormwater amenity. The bridge, again, with that, in terms of what it looks like. And then the campus overlay district. I mentioned again that was intended not to be some of this has actually been traded out for housing, but it was intended to be more of a rambling college campus. And the model they were used actually was Rollins College, which is in Runner Park, which has the buildings tend to be scattered around and stuff like that. And so what you see in that area are smaller smaller businesses, live-work businesses, but also service businesses as well. And then we also had neighborhood centers that were identified as part of the neighborhoods. And then one of this is a neighborhood clubhouse, neighborhood parks, again, neighborhood pools and stuff like that, all, again, part of the community there. Just another example of this is on Longview Park, one of the parks there at the base itself. And a couple of civic sites, including school buildings. This is the end of that building. That's the end of the Great Park, which is a civic building. Down at the end, terminated vista on that. That includes a pool, and it's a community house, but a very, very well done facility at the right location. And finally, it had walkable public schools. There's a high school immediately adjacent to it. They built a new middle school and a new elementary school. That's the middle school itself. It's walkable and actually fits in very well with the community. And I mentioned bikeway access is a key component as this goes forward. One thing I want to I think the next one, if it comes up, is the one I want to leave you with, I think. Come on. The thing that I want to leave with is that what Orlando did was to, well, let me hit this, yeah. You can see the regulatory plan from 1998 to 2009. It's almost identical. There have been some minor changes, but they're not anything significant. The vision held. The changes that are in there are really changes to maybe adjust the market a little bit or whatever. The land use plan is almost identical. These were the last amendment. And as of last year, the value of the land is about $1.2 billion in terms of the development in here. So it has had a significant impact. Michael mentioned it had won it won the Catherine Brown Award, which was one of them that I was at least proudest of, but they also won an award from a whole different group of people. They won awards for sustainable development from the Urban Land Institute for Development and the National Association for Home Building. I mean, the thing that's dramatic about this is that it's won them from a whole different set of focus points in terms of where you're coming from. So what I want to leave with is the lessons that we have were the critical importance of establishing a vision. Know what you want to have and what you want to do. Define it. Make it your plan. It has to fit what you want, what's important to you. Be proactive. I mean, we went out and we said this is what we want, and we defined that. We worked with the community. We were thorough and consistent in terms of making sure that everything was integrated. And the thing that most of us don't do is then make it easy to do the right thing. We always want a second and a third bite of the apple. And it was really important for the success of this project to have really followed those through. And I want to end really with just noting Kevin Tyeski. And I don't know how many planners have a memorial bridge that is made to him. Kevin was the planning official with me when I was in Orlando, and when I left, he became the person that nurtured Baldwin Park through its development. Last year, at the age of 52, he passed away of a heart attack, and very sudden. And the community recognized him by dedicating that bridge to him and putting that up. And so, at least there was acknowledgement of the role of Kevin in planning in the creation of the community. So, I just want to acknowledge that, and it's tough. It's still tough. He died and was a good friend. So, again, think about those four areas, because I think they're the most important thing is to know what your vision, stick with that vision, and then expect it to be implemented. Expect it to move forward. Okay. Thank you.
Rick's going to take a little breather here for a second, but we wanted to have a question and answer period, and Rick has graciously agreed to do some questions and answers. Victoria Beach, who's Mayor Pro Tem from the City of Carmel by the Sea, will conduct the question and answer period. We'll call it a period. But this is not a formal question and answer. Board members first, public second. Victoria will recognize folks as they raise their hands. And Victoria.
Thank you. Victoria will.
Oh, right. Sure.
Victoria's even going to tell you about the wood on the ceiling here.
I was actually. How did you do? Were you reading my notes? First of all, I just want to thank Rick. That was exactly what we wanted to hear, what I wanted to hear. This whole process for me, being a fairly new board member, has been a wonderful education. I feel like it's incredibly appropriate again. We have to thank Eduardo for hosting us here at this institution. I feel like I am going to grad school again, and I'm learning exactly how to be a great FORA board member, I hope. And I think this was a terrific class. I think it's also very appropriate that we are in this building. I learned today that it's made out of buildings that were here on Fort Ord. Barrack buildings, I suppose. This is all the Douglas fir here that we see is from the building, so it is very appropriate. So we go from swords to plowshares that we are in a building that did just that. I also think this is very appropriate timing for Rick to be here. I learned that by listening to his presentation. I think we are exactly where you were, maybe, or analogous position when they were between the base reuse plan and what they started calling the vision plan and other plans, because we have, just as many of us know, engaged a consultant team that is coming next week, right, for the first meeting to develop finally our design guidelines that were part of the base reuse plan. And I think those are analogous, in fact, to what Rick Bernhardt just explained that they went through. And in fact, as maybe a little point of interest, the slides that Rick showed that had the early plans that they did in the base reuse and then the ones that were final and how similar they looked, folks who weren't involved with the hiring process or the selection process of that team might know that that was one of the most impressive things that we saw, is that in there, for me anyway, that their sensitivity to understanding what had already been accomplished here in the base reuse plan, they actually showed in their portfolio that exact slide where they showed an exercise of a page from our base reuse plan, a plan that was actually under development with developers working today, and a refinement of that plan, just as Rick pointed out. So it's exactly where we want to be. Anyway, I have one question for Rick that I'd like to start with, and then I want to take questions, but I also want to make sure that Rick knows who the board members are that are here. Would you mind introducing yourselves? Maybe start at that end of the table.
I'm Bill Collins. I'm the environmental coordinator for the Base Realignment and Closure Office.
I'm Gail Morton. I'm a city councilwoman in the city of Marina.
Nancy Selfrid, city council member, city of Monterey.
Dave.
I'm not a board member. My name is Lena Spillman. I'm the deputy clerk at the Fort Ord Reuse Authority.
Dave Pendergrass, mayor of the city of Sand City.
Jerry Edlin, mayor of the city of Delray Oaks and chair.
Frank O'Connell, city of Marina, council person.
You may know your host.
Paul Tribal, superintendent, president, Monterey, Peter A. Marina, coastline district.
Bill Camp, mayor, city of Pacific Grove.
Do we have someone else is hiding in the back? Oh, they're Ian.
Ian Oglesby, Mayor Pro Tem City of Seaside, and then our Mayor Ralph Rubio went out to his car, so he'll be back.
Okay, good. So those are some of the questions, and then of course we have members of the public. I'll just start with one quick question, which is, I'm curious how it is that you talked as though this was just a given that the city of Orlando would have this kind of foresight and resolve, and I wonder what do you think was the source of that original resolve to put the community and the city first in guiding the developers and staying strong to that? And then as a follow-up, I wondered how much money they made.
I'm not sure I can answer how much money they made. Just one thing before I start that, for those of y'all that are on the council, I was planning director in Orlando for almost 20 years while this process went on. I'm currently, having grown up in Nashville originally, I returned to Nashville about 15 years ago as planning director in Nashville, which is where I'm at right now. But I also have a 40-member city council that I work with, so for those of y'all that might not have 40 members on your council, which I hope none of you do, it's kind of an ongoing challenge. I think that the foresight came from a unique set of circumstances, really. I mean, part of it was that when you think of Orlando and you think of Central Florida, you obviously think of the tourism and you think of Disney and Universal and all that's wrapped up in that. The city of Orlando itself is a city of small neighborhoods, and they're walkable neighborhoods, and they're neighborhoods where I mentioned before that they have lakes, and they're very protective of making sure those lakes stay open. And so there was a realization back in the early mid-1980s that you couldn't build those neighborhoods anymore. And we started actually in the mid-80s in redesigning our codes to have more walkable communities. So the expectation of having a mixed-use walkable community was something that the community had kind of wrestled with and had already come to grips with. We had the advantage, obviously, of having Celebration as kind of a demonstration in that location. But I think aside from that, a lot of the ideas and going through that visual preference survey and people identifying those key things really helped. I mean, it wasn't radically out of line with what you saw elsewhere in the city. I mean, there were mixed housing types, there were accessory units, there were areas where you had multifamily and smaller scale in locations. So it was just bringing those things together. Yeah.
The developers made money?
Oh yeah. The developers made plenty of money. I don't know. I do know they made plenty of money. Yes.
Question from the public hearing.
Yeah, I'm Yvonne Stone. I'm the executive director of the FORA Environmental Justice Network. I'm also a commissioner here in Monterey County with the Community Action Commission, which is for low-income people. And what I want to ask you is, you mentioned a lot about working with the community. And what we're looking at is the fact that the disadvantaged local community is not, how did you work with them in the decision-making process so that they have a voice on what they really needed in their community, their jobs, the affordable housing, and all of that?
And it was part of the process. Obviously, there were two parts of that, and I'm not. Let me get to the first part, which is not an answer to your question. Part of the base reuse opportunities is that there's an opportunity for the homeless to make claims on the land and to work from that. At the very beginning, we started with working with. There was a coalition for the homeless in our community that we worked with the developer, and basically what they did was underwrite. They basically provided a $3.5 million endowment to the coalition for the homeless to deal with things that they identified through the process that needed to be done. Not necessarily on the base, but they had the opportunity to claim some of the base property, and they were doing that more as a leverage point to get things that they felt were important. So that was negotiated through. They also provided some sponsorship, and we worked with Orlando at the time created Orlando Neighborhood Improvement Corporation, which was we did not have any affordable housing nonprofits involved. The city created one. We created my department, and they become Central Florida as a result of negotiations and talking about the need for affordable housing throughout the area. And they've become the largest provider of affordable housing in the Central Florida area. And one of the 4 pieces of property, which was down near the airport, had a lot of housing on it that was converted to affordable housing in that location. Plus, the diversity of housing here, there actually was affordable housing in the development itself. Part of that was decided by size, and part of that was that there was a commitment and a requirement that they provide. I don't remember what it was. I think it was 5 or 7% of their housing was affordable to housing was affordable to families at less than 80%.
Thank you very much. But what I was asking was, how did you all deal with the fact that if the base closed, if you had a base closure, and those people who were impacted and lost their jobs and all of that, and the responsibility of the Base Closure Act and all that, how did you implement that so that the community was
Okay, I'll be real honest. I mean, there were people that clearly lost their jobs there. They participated in. They were not looking for special treatment. They were looking for creating economic opportunities that they could take advantage of. So there was not a special call out to them because it was not an issue that was really ever raised in terms of during the process. Well, this actually created more jobs. Ultimately, created more jobs than were there before. So, yeah.
Yeah, I have two questions. What about the community association? Where does it get its regulatory power? I mean, I assume it has it. And does everyone who rents or owns property there become automatically?
They become a member of the association, right?
Is it like the California Homeowners Association?
I don't know much about California, but I doubt it. I don't think so. It's primarily the regulatory part is through the town planning office and the conditions that are part of the overall plan itself. This is designed. It was intended to foster social discussion and activities and those types of things. It's not regulatory in terms of that. That was a public process, right? Yeah.
I'm Nancy. I'm a Dale council member from the city of Marina. I'm trying to understand if you refer to this as Baldwin Park. Is Baldwin Park now incorporated unto itself? Is it incorporated? Is it obviously it's connected to the surrounding community, but is it a separate legal?
It's not a separate legal. Well, it's not a separate legal entity, but it is what was the Orlando Neighborhood Training Center.
By the city of Orlando.
Yes, yes. It's a neighborhood name, for lack of a better term.
Okay. So my question then becomes: you had mentioned early on that there were 3 agencies involved.
There were 3 jurisdictions that are involved in the entire base closure because there were 4 pieces of property. City of Orlando, Winter Park, which is a very, very small portion of Baldwin Park, is in Winter Park, very, very small portion. And it's a park, it's actually a part of a Winter Park. So, but technically it's in there. And then Orange County, which is the county, there was 2 of the parcels were in Orange County.
But
so.
All of it is under the jurisdiction of Orlando. So you didn't have multiple jurisdictions dealing with
the Baldwin Park only had Orlando and Winter Park as were the only, I mean, well, it's the county too because it's in Orange County, but they didn't. They participated, but they didn't take a role of protectionism or something like that. Yeah, they just were part of the process.
I'm trying to more understand.
Yeah. I mean, you've got a lot. I mean, that's what I said. I'm not. You have a different situation. I'm just trying to kind of go through what we did. We don't have it. It wasn't nearly as large, and it didn't have as many entities involved. Yeah.
Dave Spar, Economic Development from Monterey County. Can you explain to us how you worked and integrated the efforts of Rick Well and the Orlando group to create jobs of all ranges in Baldwin Park?
I'm not sure I can because most of that came after I was there. I mean, they were in the process of demolition when I left Orlando, so I couldn't find out. I mean, most of that was Kevin Tyeski's work and stuff that he did. But I think what we tried to do was set the framework for that happening and the way communication was and the purpose of the town planning office and all that. But most of it would have been done because the CRA director in Orlando was also the economic development director, and so he was involved with that process.
Do you have a planning of a ratio of jobs, housing ratio that you work with?
Not particularly. I mean, we were working with the gross numbers. I mean, again, this isn't, quote, an infill location. So the biggest thing we were concerned about was putting 3,000 houses here instead of on the edge of the community. That was the number one thing. We wanted it open in terms of open space, and we wanted to create as many jobs as possible. But the jobs were coming, whether they located there or not. It wasn't as important that they physically locate there as they locate inside the Central Florida area.
Thank you.
Did I do something?
Yeah, okay. Doug Yount, former Development Services Director for the city of
There it
Green,
is. It wasn't on. It wasn't on.
cities in Fort Ord.
It's on now.
Rick, can you tell us, looking back now that you've had some time and reflection, obviously being in the city of Nashville now too, and looking back, what things would you, or look at, what, not you've looked at lessons learned, but what would you do differently, or what would be advice for doing something differently having gone through that process?
It's a good question. What would we do differently? I wish it wouldn't have taken, there was an awful lot of meetings. But I don't know that there's a way to get there without doing that, because you have to spend time. And part of what my job is as a planner, and I think it was there, is that most of these plans are not effective as my plan, and they're not effective as a council's plan. Councils come and go. No offense to you on the councils, but they do come and go. So the plan has to reflect the values of the community, and so they're the ones that are going to defend it. And so you have to spend time making sure it's their plan. And again, with 40 council members, I much prefer to have neighborhood groups up there saying, we worked on this plan and we want you to uphold it, than have them go and undermine it. So it seemed at the time that it took an awful lot of time, because we had that 5 or 6 year lead time before it ever, and everybody was anxious to get it going more than anything. I will tell you, if you ask David Pace, who was the person that actually directed the project, he'll be very clear in telling you what he did wrong, and that was that he sold one of the blocks in the town center, and it's, as of today, it hadn't been built. And he said it's his worst mistake, was selling it and not requiring them to build it within a certain time period, because it's a blank block there on that. He said they would have built something on that sucker and kept it going. But I don't know that I have anything. I think the process was good, and I don't have, nothing comes to mind. I know that's not the right answer, because there has to be something, but nothing comes to mind immediately.
Thank you. Yeah, I did a little bit of looking on the internet about Baldwin Park, and I found that Orlando Partners was backed by the Hyatt family, the Pritzker family, and that the city ended up paying $20 million to the family after they completely bought Orlando Partners, just to get Baldwin Park started, and that the Orlando Utilities Commission used rate increases to construct water facilities in the area. And on top of that, there's another segment of the base called Southport, which I understand was the low-income apartments or something, and it's partially redeveloped. I'm not quite clear, but that's it's all fenced off, and it's just a disaster. At least it was as of 2010. I'm not sure where that's at right now. And I also could find pages and pages of foreclosures and house prices reduced by $8,000, $16,000, $10,000. Quite a number of empty, foreclosed, bank-owned places. So I don't exactly know how this would fit into our neighborhood now on the beautiful central coast of California, but I'm interested to hear more and see how if this is an overlay on top of what we've already discussed in the base reuse plan, or something new that's going to go on top of Marina Community Partners, or what we were told was going to be livable, walkable right out here, that turned out to be a big box cookie cutter development, just like the one 4 miles away.
So I can't answer how it applies here. Somebody else will have to answer that. South Park was what I talked about. It was one of the 4 areas. Most of the housing was single family sold. It was affordable housing. It was actually, on the tour today we were talking about it, when we got into rehab, a lot of those houses, they were actually framed in 2x6 redwood, which was pretty spectacular when you actually saw that. They were remodeled and sold individually. There were 1 or 2, maybe 3 multifamily sites that's down by the airport, and I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at there. I do know, though, in regard to foreclosures, Orlando itself was one of the markets, was one of the top 3 or 4 markets in the entire country for foreclosures. And I don't doubt that there were some in Baldwin Park, but I do know that the ones in Baldwin Park had a lot lower percentage of foreclosures than the rest of Orange County, significantly. And at the same time, they never stopped actually building in Baldwin Park during the 2007 to 2010 recession. They continued to build. So I won't say there weren't some, but it wasn't nearly as many as was elsewhere in the. You look at some of the areas in Orange County, and you had 80% foreclosures, and not in Baldwin Park.
We only have a few more minutes. I saw 2 other hands up, so we'll just try to fit in those last 2 questions. This lady here.
You spoke a lot about community involvement and having it be the community vision. As you said, the council comes and goes. How exactly was the process of getting the community involved consistently in the ongoing discussions and implementing the plan that they saw for the base?
They were heavily involved in that whole initial process up to adoption of the plan, and then after that, it hadn't been a public process because they're simply implementing the plan. The public process would have been involved in any amendments that would go through that. We had over 350 meetings total during that process, and some of them were small, some of them were large, some of them were, controversial, some of them were pretty straightforward. We had an awful lot on the roadway issues, which was probably the major issue. There were the initial meetings were, do you just leave it as a park? And there was that fundamental decision, we're going to leave 200 acres as a park, we're going to have 200 acres of lakes as open, but we're going to develop the rest. Once you had that decision, we didn't go back and revisit that decision. The community said, okay, how do we go from here to the next point, and what were those issues? Part of it, there was some discussion about, is it too dense and all, but those were all things that were worked through. The roads were probably the most contentious component of that.
Last question?
Yeah, Victor. So I guess the question I have is, when you look at the commercial development, is most of it visitor serving in some way to make it a more community orientation?
No, this is really, it's mostly local serving, and this is local serving. It's all community. It's not visitor or tourist oriented at all.
I looked to see what the employments were, and visitor serving is number 1 or 2 in the Orlando area.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I didn't know how much of that spilled into this development, or if this was more like they just showed the debt service and the dry cleaners and the things.
No, this is all local serving. I don't want to mislead you that Orlando's number 1 in terms of tourism and visitors service. This is just not. This is a normal neighborhood serving commercial.
I just didn't know if it spilled into Baldwin Park, or if Baldwin Park
not really
workforce for that.
No, it's not really oriented that way.
One more question: can we have your stormwater? We could use it. We'd love stormwater.
You might not get the stormwater on the slides. That's what I was going to ask. Yeah. So maybe if you have follow-up questions later, I guess our time is out, but we could certainly.
Sure. Yeah. Let me know. Right.
And we can maybe throw up the slides onto the FORA website as we have been doing. So I think I will be revisiting them, and I really thank you so much, Rick, for enlightening us today on as we try to move forward on our work.
Well, thank you, and good luck to y'all. I will. Let me say one last thing, because when I first, talked to Victoria about this, she mentioned, and this is a view from somebody that's not involved with here. I said, how can anything on the Monterey Peninsula have a problem? Because it's one of the most beautiful locations in the country, and it's from somebody outside of here. It's very, very difficult to understand why you would have be willing to lower any of your expectations, because I think you've got really a gem, and you need to decide what you want to do with it, and then go on about doing it. So,
you can do it. We can do it.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.